Okay, so we're in this video I'm going to introduce a very famous game. Some of you may have heard of it before, called the Prisoner's Dilemma. Okay, and so the basic idea is, and this game is a framework for that we're then going to use to analyze the Prisoner's Dilemma. Is the basic story: two people commit a crime, right? And they commit a crime, and then they are arrested by the police, but the police don't really have any strong evidence on them, and they're hoping to get a confession out of at least one of them. So what do? So they separate them, they take them to their cells, and then they question them separately, right? And each person they're saying, oh, the other person is telling all the information. They're ratting on you, and you're going to end up going to jail for a long time. But if you tell us what happened, we'll cut you a deal, and then only your partner will go to jail, and you'll get out pretty fast. Okay. Ahead of time, they've agreed that they would stay silent if they got caught because they knew the police don't have much evidence, and so they knew they can only convict them of some kind of lesser crime. Okay, so this is the idea, and then we're gonna see, well, why do they give up the information? Before we start, so this is gonna be something. This is called game theory, and we're gonna do define something called the Nash. Okay, so each actor. So actors, the people in the game, choose best strategy chosen by the other actors. So you can have more than two people. Ours is just going to have two people for simplicity. So they first look at what the other people could do, and then they see what they want to do. Okay. Okay. So then, and that's what we're going to look at. So we need to now create our game. So what do? We create our game. In our game, we have two people. So our actors are here. Bonnie, two famous criminals you may have heard of. I don't actually know what they did, but I just heard of them, so we're using the name. Okay, and so then we create a matrix, and our matrix has actions, so the people can choose to stay silent or to confess, and they can choose to stay silent. Okay, so for example, this square right here is both of them stay silent. And this square right here is both of them confess, and then this one, so you get the idea. Okay, so there's going to be something about the payoffs. The payoff, which is on the left-hand side, is going to go with Clyde. That's Clyde's. And the payoff on the right-hand side, let me make it a different color, is going to go with Bonnie. And this is pretty standard way to do it. I think your book does it slightly differently, but this is a pretty standard way to do it. Okay. So what that means, 1 and 1. So this in this case, it's going to be years. So they think if they both stay silent, they're going to be able to get away with just 1 year in jail. Okay, so maybe they did some big crime, pretty serious, but they think they'll only be able to convict them on some lesser crimes like violating probation or something like that. Okay, so that's good. And if they both confess, they expect to get a lot of time in jail. Okay, so they expect to get 8 years in jail if they both confess, right? They'll get a little reduction for the confession. They'll be able to negotiate a plea maybe, but they're going to get a lot of time in jail. So which one do you think they want to do? Well, obviously right now you'd say, well, they should stay silent, right? They should stay silent because they'll do a lot less time in jail. But we're going to find out that actually staying silent is a hard equilibrium to hold. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so let me show you the payoffs then for what if Bonnie confesses and Clyde stays silent? Okay, so what do you think is going to happen? Well, Clyde's going to go to jail for a long time. Just for argument's sake, let's say it's 20 years. Okay, because Bonnie's going to tell everything, and Clyde will also get punished as hard as possible for not cooperating, right? And they're going to let Bonnie go completely. Okay, and so then let's suppose down here, Clyde confesses. So again, we're here to confess for Clyde. Clyde confesses, so Clyde goes free, and Bonnie. So this is our game. Now this is the structure of this kind of game. Okay, so now let's see what we're going to do. So the way we find the Nash equilibrium. So this is our payoff matrix. It shows what each person is going to get for each behavior, but it depends on the other person. So now what you do to find the answer is you take each person and you say, if this person does this, what should you do? If this person does this, what should you do? Okay, so first of all, let's take Bonnie. Let's suppose Clyde was to stay silent. Which one should Bonnie choose? Should Bonnie choose silent and go to jail for 1 year, or confess and get out free? Well, so we'll come back to this later if there's anything else we should consider here. Okay, but right now, if we're just looking at rational mind, we would pick confess. Well, let me get a different color. That's not. We would pick confess. And what if Bonnie confesses? Well, then the choice is clear: 8 years versus 20 years. Definitely Bonnie. If Clyde confesses, Bonnie should definitely confess. Okay. So either way, the best that Bonnie can do, given either of Clyde's behaviors, is to confess, because Bonnie will get less years for confessing than for not confessing. Okay. In either case. Okay. Let's suppose Bonnie stays silent. So we're in this column, right? So 1 versus 0. So, well then, Clyde should confess. And then let's suppose Bonnie confesses. What should Clyde do? And 20 versus 8, well, Clyde should confess. So we end up here with confess, confess. And so we get this idea that the silent in this case is called the cooperating equilibrium, because they're cooperating with each other, not with the police. It's about cooperating with each other. So even though they want to stay silent because it's better for them, it's difficult to hold together, right? And this we actually find out in the real world is true. So especially if they give something really good to the person for confessing, like get out of jail free and witness relocation, start a new life, even though you are being accused of really serious crimes. So if they give something quite good to the person who does the confessing, then it can be difficult to hold this cooperation together, and that's what this tells us. So what it tells us is we would tend, if we'd had this structure, then most of the time we're going to tend to go to this confess, and most of the time the criminals are going to get caught, okay, and going to put themselves into jail. And they want to stay at this silent, but it will be difficult for them to do so if there's big incentives for confessing. And also, some of you might say, well, what if they want to stay loyal? And that's true. If they want to stay loyal, then they might want to stay silent. But if there's any chance that the other person's confessing, they also want to avoid getting 20 years in jail, right? So if there's any chance the other person's confessing, they're going to want to avoid getting 20 years in jail. So if they don't 100% trust that the other person will stay silent, then their best action is to confess. Not only do they get less years if the other person does stay silent, but they minimize their risk a little bit. Okay, so the last thing before we're going to go into the case where how does this relate to business is the structure of this game then shows that cooperation can be difficult if there's a payoff for cheating, because there's an incentive to cheat in this case, right? We have an incentive to cheat. So in the real world, how do criminal organizations hold together cooperation? Okay, because we see this structure. So how do they hold together cooperation? So couple of things, and then we'll go to a business case in a second. How to hold together a cooperation, right? Which is silent. There are two things that they normally do. So one is they might have social norms. So there might develop amongst the people involved in these kind of crimes some kind of norms that confessing and ratting on other people is a very serious transgression of social norms, and there's also going to be threats. Okay, so that threats of violence. So in many cases, that's the number one way that criminal organizations will use to keep people silent when they're faced with these kind of payoffs, is threats of violence, and sometimes it has to be threats of violence against family members or other things. So one of the reasons criminal organizations would use violence is to try to achieve this cooperating equilibrium of silent. Okay? In the next video, we'll come back and show how this relates to oligopoly.